The Glitz and Glamour Gala. The ballroom of the Ambassador Hotel shimmered under the weight of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. Each facet caught and refracted the relentless strobes of the photographers clustered at the entrance, transforming the grand hall into a pulsating nebula of light. Gowns of silk and satin flowed like liquid jewels across the polished marble, their wearers a constellation of Hollywood's brightest stars, each vying for a sliver of the spotlight. The air, thick with the scent of gardenias, expensive perfume and nervous excitement, hummed with 1,000 hushed conversations, punctuated by the clink of champagne flutes. Eleanor Vance, perched elegantly on a velvet settee near a potted palm, observed the unfolding spectacle with the detached amusement of a seasoned critic. Her emerald eyes, sharp and discerning, tracked the subtle choreography of power and influence playing out before her. She saw the producers, their smiles practiced and their handshakes firm, navigating the room like sharks in a gilded tank. She noted the starlets, their youth and beauty weaponized, angling for proximity to the industry's titans. And then there were the legends, the true constellations whose very presence seemed to bend the light around them. The usual suspects, she mused, performing their well-rehearsed roles. A sudden hush rippled through the crowd, a collective intake of breath that signaled an important arrival. Heads swiveled, murmurs died down, and the photographers at the door went into a frenzy, their flashes exploding like a rapid-fire artillery barrage. Frankie the Voice Vitale, a supernova of charisma, stood framed in the archway, his tailored tuxedo a stark contrast to the blinding white light behind him. He paused, a deliberate bet, allowing the adoration to wash over him, a connoisseur savouring a fine vintage. His smile, dazzling and genuine in its desire to please, widened as he surveyed the room, his eyes scanning for familiar faces, for the nods of approval he craved like air. He began his slow, regal procession into the heart of the gala, a king entering his court, his every step a confident stride, his hand frequently rising to acknowledge the clamouring whispers and admiring gazes. Ellie watched him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. Frankie, ever the showman. He loved this, thrived on it and needed it. She caught a glimpse of Dino the Smooth Rossi, already ensconced at a prime table. A picture of effortless grace amidst the manufactured chaos. Dino, always a step ahead, always finding the quiet centre in any storm. He met her gaze across the room, a subtle nod, a shared understanding passing between them that transcended the cacophony. The real show, Ellie knew, was yet to begin, and the king takes the stage. A hush fell, then erupted into a roar of applause as Frankie Vitale, a gleaming smile plastered across his face, sauntered to the podium. The spotlight caught the sheen of his perfectly coiffed hair, reflecting off the crystal chandeliers overhead. He clasped the microphone, a practiced gesture, and let the cheers wash over him, drinking in the adoration like a fine scotch. All right, settle down, you crazy cats," his voice, a smooth baritone that had charmed millions, filled the grand ballroom. A ripple of laughter spread through the tables. "It's good to see so many familiar faces, and some that are just familiar shapes after all this incredible food." More laughter, a comfortable, appreciative sound. Frankie knew how to work a room. He launched into a brief, heartfelt tribute to the charity, his words earnest and well-received, before his eyes, sharp and knowing, found Dino Rossi's table. "But tonight," Frankie continued, a mischievous glint in his eye, "we're here to celebrate, to give back, and to perhaps, just perhaps, witness a few miracles, like Dino Rossi, for example, making it through an entire evening without needing a sobriety test." A wave of chuckles swept through the room. Dino, seated beside a serene Ellie Vance, offered a slow, easy smile, his eyes twinkling. He lifted his glass of sparkling water in a mock toast. Eleanor, however, merely raised an eyebrow, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her elegant features as she watched Frankie. "Now don't get me wrong, folks," Frankie pressed on, leaning into the mic as if sharing a secret. "Dino's a legend, a true titan, but I remember one time we were in Vegas after a show, and Dino, bless his heart, thought the revolving door at the hotel was a particularly so carousel, kept trying to put a quarter in it." The stew, clearly rehearsed, landed with a crescendo of mirth. Frankie paused, letting the laughter subside. His gaze still fixed on Dino. Another time he was convinced the ice machine was actually a very tiny, very cold slot machine, said it owed him $20. The room roared. Frankie was on a roll, the king holding court, his charisma a palpable force. Dino simply smiled, a picture of genial amusement, occasionally exchanging a quiet word with Eleanor. But a keen observer like Ellie would notice the subtle tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clench of his jaw beneath the placid exterior. The stories were funny, yes, but the repetition, the slight edge in Frankie's voice hinted at something more than playful banter. The laughter around them felt increasingly sharp, like 1,000 tiny needles, as Frankie continued to weave his narrative of Dino's supposed inebriation, each anecdote chipping away, however subtly, at the smooth facade of Dino the Smooth Rossi. Dino's unwavering gaze. The lens glided closer, a silent predator seeking out the vulnerable. It found Dino not swaying or slurring, but utterly still, his eyes fixed on Frankie at the podium. The laughter around them, a cacophony of polite appreciation and genuine amusement, seemed to ripple off him without effect. He offered no smile, no flinch, just that unwavering gaze, a quiet anchor in the swirling room. The camera lingered, a full 10 seconds, broadcasting his unblinking sobriety to every screen in the banquet hall. Ellie Vance, perched elegantly at a nearby table, felt the shift before she consciously registered it. The initial burst of mirth at Frankie's first barb had been boisterous, almost communal. Now, as the jokes grew sharper, tinged with a subtle, uncomfortable edge, the laughter became fragmented. Some still guffawed, others offered hesitant titters, and a few like Ellie simply watched. Her discerning gaze, usually softened by a knowing smile, sharpened as she observed Dino. She'd seen him drunk countless times, a charming stumble, a playful leer, a perfectly timed mumble. This, however, was different. This was a man utterly devoid of the persona, a man observing, processing, and revealing nothing. A flicker of memory crossed Dino's mind, a smoky backroom in Vegas years ago. "It's a shield, kid," his mentor, an old vaudevillian with 1,000 stories in his eyes, had slurred. A real drink in his hand. People laugh at the drunk, they don't look too close at the man underneath. Dino had taken that advice and crafted a masterpiece. The slurred words, the casual sway, the charming indiscretions, each a deliberate stroke on a canvas designed to deflect and endear. It allowed him to observe, to listen, to understand the currents flowing beneath the surface of any room. It gave him an almost invisible vantage point. Tonight, however, the shield was down, not by choice, but by circumstance. And the cameras, those relentless truth-tellers, were capturing it all. He felt the collective gaze, the subtle hum of curiosity and judgment. He knew Frankie, knew the glint in his eye that signalled the line was not just being approached, but danced over with reckless abandon. The crowd's laughter, once a shared experience, was now a series of individual reactions, a barometer of their own comfort with Frankie's increasingly cutting remarks. Ellie, he noticed, hadn't laughed once in the last minute. Her eyes, intelligent and assessing, met his for a fleeting second across the room, a shared understanding, perhaps, of the true nature of the performance unfolding before them. Dino gave no indication he had seen her, his expression still a mask of unflappable calm. The camera pulled back slightly, but his quiet intensity remained the focal point, a silent counterpoint to Frankie's boisterous, increasingly cruel monologue. The crowd's discomfort. The clinking of ice against crystal and the murmur of polite conversation had been the backdrop to Frankie's earlier jesting. Now, a different kind of hush descended, punctuated by strained chuckles. His voice, usually a velvety caress, had taken on a brittle edge. What started as good-natured ribbing about Dino's liquid lunch habits, a well-worn staple of their public personas, began to curdle. "And you know Dino," Frankie boomed, his eyes sweeping the room, lingering a moment too long on his friend. "He's so dedicated to his craft. He even practices his slurring off stage." A smattering of laughter followed, thinner than before, like paper tearing. A few guests exchanged uneasy glances, their smiles tightening. Eleanor Vance, perched elegantly on a velvet banquette, observed the shift with a practiced eye. She saw the way the laughter no longer reached the eyes of the women in shimmering gowns, the way the men in their sharp tuxedos shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The air, once effervescent with bonhomie, grew heavy with unspoken apprehension. Frankie, basking in the spotlight, seemed oblivious, or perhaps uncaring. His next sally was sharper still. "Heard Dino's latest diet plan," Frankie continued, a wolfish grin spreading across his face. "It involves a strict regimen of whatever's left in the bottom of the bottle." This time, the silence was more profound than the laughter. A ripple of unease spread through the room, visible in the subtle tightening of shoulders, the sudden interest in the intricate patterns of the Persian rug. Several heads swiveled almost imperceptibly towards Dino, who remained impassive, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He lifted his champagne flute, taking a slow, deliberate sip. His composure, in contrast to Frankie's escalating barbs, was absolute. Eleanor noted the way Frankie's bravado seemed to inflate with each joke, as if feeding off the tension he was creating. It was a familiar pattern, she realised, a power play veiled in humour. But the veil was fraying. The crowd, accustomed to the playful sparring of the Rat Pack, was now witnessing something uglier. The humour had lost its sparkle, replaced by a brittle, almost aggressive edge. The discomfort was palpable, a growing tide that even Frankie's undeniable charisma couldn't stem. The festive glow of the gala was dimming, overshadowed by the uncomfortable truth of a friendship pushed to its breaking point in front of a captive audience. A friendship on the brink. The clink of ice in crystal glasses, the murmur of polite conversation, the shimmer of diamonds under the ballroom's opulent chandeliers, all of it seemed to hold its breath as Frankie, mic in hand, paused for effect. His smile, usually so infectious, stretched a little too wide, a touch too predatory. "And then there's Dino," he declared, his voice booming with theatrical relish. "Who needs a designated driver just to find his way to the bar? We almost had to send out a search party after he'd mistook the coat check for the confession booth last week." A ripple of nervous laughter, thin and forced, spread through the room. It wasn't the usual uproarious burst Frankie's quips typically generated. Eleanor, seated at a nearby table, felt a knot tightened in her stomach. She watched Dino, who sat with an almost unnerving stillness, a half-smile playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. His gaze was fixed on Frankie, unwavering like a hawk observing its prey. The applause for Frankie's barb was noticeably muted, punctuated by the awkward scrape of a chair. The air, thick with the scent of gardenias and expensive perfume, now thrummed with an unspoken question. At table 3, Mrs. Dubois whispered to her husband, "Did you hear that? Frankie's really pushing it tonight." "Isn't he?" "He's always been a showman, dear," Mr. Dubois replied, though his eyes darted towards Dino with a flicker of concern. "But this feels different." Across the room, Eleanor caught the eye of the famed columnist Walter Winchell, who offered a subtle, knowing nod. They both understood. The playful jabs had morphed into something sharper, and something that tasted of a veiled challenge. The usual light-hearted banter, staple of their legendary camaraderie, felt brittle, stretched to its breaking point. Dino simply took a slow, deliberate sip of his mineral water, the ice clinking softly against the rim. He said nothing, his expression unreadable, yet his sense was more potent than any retort. It hung in the air, a heavy velvet curtain, separating him from the boisterous spectacle unfolding before him. The guests exchanged glances, a collective holding of breath, wondering if the unbreakable bond of the Rat Pack was, at this very moment, beginning to fray. Dino's turn. "Oh," the host's voice boomed, cutting through the lingering echoes of laughter. "For a man whose charm is as legendary as his talent, Mr. Dino Rossi." A collective intake of breath rippled through the ballroom, a silence so profound one could almost hear the clinking of ice in half-finished champagne flutes. Every eye snapped towards the table where Dino had sat, a picture of quiet composure throughout Frankie's recent, rather pointed performance. The air crackled with anticipation, a mix of morbid curiosity and genuine concern. Dino rose with unhurried grace. He adjusted the cuff of his impeccably tailored tuxedo, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, before beginning his slow journey towards the podium. He moved like a man with no need to rush, his steps measured, his posture relaxed. There was no theatrical sigh, no dramatic pause, just a steady, confident progression. The spotlight, which had just moments ago seemed to cling to Frankie, now swiveled to embrace Dino. illuminating the almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of his lips. Eleanor Vance, seated at a prime vantage point, leaned forward almost imperceptibly. Her perfectly manicured hand rested on the linen tablecloth, a slight tremor the only betrayal of her heightened focus. She had witnessed countless such skirmishes in this gilded cage of celebrity, but this one felt different. Frankie had pushed hard, harder than usual, and the undercurrent of malice in his jokes had not gone unnoticed by her discerning ear. She expected fireworks, a sharp retort, or perhaps a crushing display of Dino's famed wit designed to put Frankie firmly in his place. Or worse, a public collapse under the pressure, a moment of humiliation that would be replayed in whispers for years. Her gaze, sharp and analytical, followed Dino's every move, ready to dissect the impending confrontation. Dino reached the podium, his presence commanding without a single word. He rested his hands lightly on its surface, his eyes sweeping across the sea of faces before him. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth radiated from him, a stark contrast to the chilled atmosphere Frankie had left behind. He didn't glance at Frankie, who now sat at his table, a predatory glint in his eyes, ready for the show. Dino's attention was on the room, on the collective expectation, and in that moment, he seemed to absorb it all, transforming the tension not into aggression, but into something else entirely. The air shifted, no longer heavy with dread, but humming with a different kind of energy, one that promised something unexpected. The unexpected tribute. A hush fell as Dino, the smooth Rossi, impeccably tailored in midnight blue, rose from his seat. The spotlight found him, illuminating a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. He moved with an unhurried grace that seemed to defy the tension in the room, making his way to the podium Frankie had just vacated. The air still vibrated with the echoes of Frankie the Voice Vitale's cutting remarks, a lingering tang of anticipated animosity. Reaching the microphone, Dino adjusted it with a deliberate slowness. His gaze swept over the sea of famous faces, landing briefly on Ellie Vance, whose discerning eyes met his with a flicker of intrigue. Then he turned to Frankie, still perched at the main table, a triumphant smirk fading as Dino's calm demeanour registered. "Well," Dino's voice, a warm, resonant baritone, filled the vast ballroom. "I must thank Frankie for that spirited introduction. Nothing like a little free publicity, eh, pal?" A ripple of nervous laughter spread through the crowd, quickly dying down as they waited for the expected counter-jab, the cutting retort. But it never came. Instead, Dino's expression softened, a genuine warmth replacing the earlier amusement. He cleared his throat, his eyes now fixed on Frankie with an almost paternal affection. "You know, there are some people in this world who are simply irreplaceable, forces of nature. And Frankie, my dear friend, you are most certainly one of them." Frankie shifted uncomfortably, the easy confidence draining from his posture. He hadn't braced for this. Dino continued, his voice imbued with a startling sincerity that resonated through the opulent space. "From the first time I heard that voice, a voice that could crack open the heavens or whisper secrets to your soul, I knew I was in the presence of something extraordinary, a talent so immense, so pure, it transcended mere performance. He doesn't just sing songs, he lives them, breathes life into every note, every lyric." The crowd, initially poised for a spectacle of ego, now found itself utterly disarmed. Heads turned, not in anticipation of a fight, but in shared admiration. Ellie, usually stoic, leaned forward slightly, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lips. Dino, with a rather quiet strength, was effortlessly stealing the scene. "And, beyond the voice," Dino added, his gaze still holding Frankie's, "there's the heart. A man who, despite all the bravado, all the bright lights, has a kindness, a loyalty, a generosity that few ever see. A friend who has stood by me, lifted me up and challenged me to be better than I thought I could be." A profound silence had fallen. Frankie, usually so quick with a comeback, looked utterly bewildered, his earlier triumph replaced by a genuine flush. He mumbled something inaudible, perhaps a thank you, perhaps an apology. Dino simply nodded, a gentle, knowing smile returning. The tables had not just been turned, they had been gracefully, unequivocally, and permanently shifted. The shifting sands of power. A ripple of unease, barely perceptible at first, began to spread through the ballroom. The polite tittering that had accompanied Frankie's initial jabs at Dino had morphed into something colder, a forced chuckle that died quickly in the opulent air. Each subsequent punchline delivered with Frankie's customary bravado now landed with a hollow thud. His bright blue eyes, usually alight with mischievous charm, now held a glint of desperation as he scanned the faces before him. He'd misjudged the mood, the delicate line between playful rivalry and outright meanness. The laughter had thinned, replaced by a murmur of hushed conversations and the clinking of ice against crystal as attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Dino, still seated at his table, offered no reaction. His face remained a mask of placid indifference, a half smile playing on his lips, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. The camera, originally focused on Frankie's animated performance, now flicked to Dino, lingering on his unperturbed expression. The juxtaposition was stark. Frankie's frenetic energy, once captivating, now seemed a little frantic, while Dino's quiet dignity radiated an unexpected strength. Eleanor Vance, perched elegantly at a nearby table, watched the unfolding drama with the keen eye of a seasoned observer. She'd seen countless acts of posturing and power plays in this gilded world, but this felt different. Frankie, usually so adept at reading a room, was floundering. His usual magnetic pull was weakening, replaced by an awkward fluster. He fumbled a punchline, his voice cracking ever so slightly. A flush crept up his neck, betraying the chink in his otherwise impenetrable armour. The king was losing his crown not to a rival's attack,